A couple paid $100 for abandoned junk from an estate sale cleanup. Inside a box of worthless paintings was a canvas that would rewrite art history and transform their lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Marcus Webb stood in the scorching Arizona sun, watching the estate sale liquidators load the final items into their truck. At 68 years old, he'd seen plenty of estate sales in his 4 decades as a furniture restorer. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way the family had simply abandoned everything after the owner died. Maybe it was the hastily scrawled "make offer" signs on boxes that clearly contained a lifetime of memories. Or maybe it was just the desert heat playing tricks on his mind. His wife, Claire, emerged from the house, wiping dust from her hands. At 66, she still moved with the energy of someone half her age, her silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her green eyes sharp and assessing. She'd been a librarian for 35 years before retiring, and her systematic approach to cataloging and organization had proven invaluable in their small antique restoration business. "They're taking everything," she observed, watching the liquidators work with efficient indifference. "Even the family photos. Can you imagine just walking away from all of it?" Marcus shook his head. The deceased, a woman named Evelyn Hartley, according to the sale paperwork, had lived in this modest ranch house for over 50 years. Now her belongings were being sorted into valuable and trash piles by people who'd never known her, never heard her stories, never understood the significance of each carefully preserved item. "The nephew said he lives in Singapore," Marcus explained. "Works in finance. Couldn't be bothered to fly back for more than the funeral. Told the liquidators to sell everything and send him a check." Claire's expression tightened with disapproval. They'd raised 3 children themselves: Jessica, now a teacher in Oregon, Thomas, a software engineer in Seattle, and Linda, a nurse in Phoenix. None of them had become wealthy or famous, but all of them understood the value of family history and connection. The thought of abandoning a parent or relative's entire life to strangers felt fundamentally wrong. "Did they at least go through everything first?" she asked. "Doubtful. The nephew said he wanted nothing except the jewelry and some silverware. Everything else was just old junk to him." Marcus's voice carried an edge of bitterness. In his profession, he'd witnessed too many family treasures destroyed or discarded by heirs who saw only dollar signs or burdens. The head liquidator, a heavy-set man named Gary, approached them with a clipboard. "You folks interested in anything before we haul it to the warehouse? We've got some furniture pieces that might work for restoration. There's also about 20 boxes of miscellaneous items, books, knickknacks, artwork. The family doesn't want any of it. I'm supposed to dump it, but I figured I'd offer it to dealers first." Marcus and Claire exchanged glances. Their workshop was already overflowing with projects, and their modest retirement income didn't allow for speculative purchases. But something about this situation tugged at them both. "What would you want for the miscellaneous boxes?" Marcus asked. Gary consulted his clipboard. "Tell you what, we're trying to clear out fast. The whole lot, all 20 boxes, I'll let you have them for $100. It's mostly junk, but you might find something worth reselling. Books, old frames, some paintings that aren't worth the canvas they're painted on, random stuff." "Can we look through them first?" Claire asked. "Sure, but I need an answer in 15 minutes. We're on a schedule." They hurried into the house, where the boxes were stacked in what had been a spare bedroom. The room smelled of dust and old paper, that distinctive scent of forgotten things, slowly surrendering to time. Marcus opened the first box while Claire examined another. Books, mostly paperback mysteries from the 70s and 80s. Claire reported. "A few hardcovers, nothing valuable, some ceramic figurines." Marcus's box contained picture frames of various sizes, most with the glass cracked or missing. Behind them were several paintings, amateur landscapes, and still lifes executed with more enthusiasm than skill. Nothing exceptional here either. They moved through the boxes quickly, finding similar contents. Old magazines, vinyl records with scratched surfaces, costume jewelry tangled in knots, yellowed photographs of people whose names were lost to time. It was exactly as Gary had described. The detritus of an ordinary life, valuable to no one except perhaps the person who'd lived it. Claire was about to suggest they pass on the offer when Marcus pulled out a canvas from the bottom of the 18th box. Unlike the other paintings, this one was wrapped in a faded bedsheet and tied with string that had become brittle with age. This one was hidden, he noted, carefully unwrapping it. The sheet fell away to reveal a painting roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, its surface darkened by decades of grime and what appeared to be cigarette smoke. The image beneath the dirt was barely visible, some kind of portrait, maybe, or a figure study. The frame was nothing special, plain wood with age cracks along the joints. Can you make out what it is? Claire leaned closer, squinting at the obscured image. Not really. Could be anything under all this dirt. Marcus turned it over. The back of the canvas was covered in a layer of dust so thick it obscured any markings. He blew gently, clearing a small section, and froze. What is it? Claire asked. There's something written here. Hold on. He carried the painting to the window where afternoon light streamed through. Using a sleeve, he carefully wiped more dust away, revealing handwritten text in faded ink. It says, I can't quite make it out. The handwriting's ornate, maybe French? There's a date, I think. Looks like 1886 or 1896. Claire pulled out her phone, turning on the flashlight to illuminate the writing more clearly. That's definitely 19th century script. And those numbers, I think it says 1891. A tingle of possibility crept up Marcus's spine. In 40 years of dealing with antiques and old furniture, he'd learned to recognize certain signs. The way this painting had been carefully wrapped and hidden at the bottom of a box, the age of the canvas and frame, the elaborate handwriting on the back suggesting provenance documentation. None of it guaranteed value, but all of it warranted attention. What do you think? Claire asked quietly, understanding the unspoken question. For $100, we'd be getting 19 other boxes of junk we don't need and probably can't sell, Marcus reasoned. But this one painting, there's something about it. Your intuition? She smiled slightly. Over their decades together, she'd learned to trust his instincts about objects. He couldn't always explain why certain pieces called to him, but he was right more often than not. Call it professional curiosity. At worst, we've wasted $100 and I can strip the frame for parts. At best. He shrugged, not wanting to voice hopes that would almost certainly be disappointed. Gary appeared in the doorway. Time's up, folks. You want the boxes or not? Marcus looked at Claire, who gave a slight nod. We'll take them. Cash, okay? Marcus pulled 5 20s from his wallet, money they'd budgeted for their weekly groceries. They'd eat simply this week, but something told him this was important. Gary counted the bills. Pleasure doing business. You'll need to get them out of here in the next hour. We're locking up after that. It took 3 trips in their aging pickup truck to transport all 20 boxes to their workshop, a converted garage behind their small rental house in a working-class Phoenix neighborhood. By the time they'd finished, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that Arizona did so well. We must be crazy, Claire said, surveying the boxes now stacked along one wall of the already crowded workshop. What are we going to do with all of this? Go through it systematically, Marcus replied. Sort the books, clean the frames, evaluate anything that might have resale value. It'll keep us busy for a few weeks. But his eyes kept returning to the wrapped painting, still sitting where he'd placed it on his main workbench. Now, under the workshop's bright overhead lights, it looked even less impressive, just another dirty old canvas that had spent decades forgotten in someone's spare room. Claire noticed his attention. Want to clean it tonight? See what we actually bought? Tomorrow, he decided. It's late, and proper cleaning requires good light and patience. Let's get some rest. But sleep proved elusive for Marcus. He lay awake, listening to Claire's steady breathing beside him, his mind returning again and again to that painting. There was something about it, something he couldn't quite articulate but felt deeply, a sense of importance, of hidden significance waiting to be revealed. Around 3 a.m., he gave up on sleep and padded quietly to the workshop. He turned on the lights, wincing at their sudden brightness, and approached the workbench where the painting waited. Just a quick look, he told himself, just to confirm it's nothing special so I can stop obsessing. He gathered his cleaning supplies, soft brushes, cotton swabs, gentle cleaning solution specially formulated for old canvases. Working under a magnifying lamp, he began at one corner, using the lightest possible touch to remove the surface grime. The first layer came away easily, mostly dust and cobwebs, the accumulation of years in a forgotten corner. Beneath that was a brownish film, likely nicotine staining from cigarette smoke. This required more careful work, using barely dampened cotton swabs to dissolve and lift the residue without damaging the paint beneath. As he worked, an image began to emerge, a face, rendered in extraordinary detail. The brushwork was confident and skilled, showing an expert's hand. The paint itself had a quality he recognized from museum pieces, thick, impasto strokes, alternating with delicate glazes, building up layers of depth and luminosity. Marcus's heart began to beat faster. He knew enough about art to recognize quality when he saw it, and this was quality. Professional quality, museum quality. He cleaned faster now, his earlier caution warring with growing excitement. More of the face emerged, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark hair and an enigmatic expression. She wasn't smiling exactly, but her eyes held a certain knowing amusement, as if she understood a joke the viewer wasn't privy to. The background was less distinct, rendered in loose brushstrokes that suggested an interior space without defining it precisely. This technique, sharp focus on the subject, while the background dissolved into abstraction, was characteristic of certain late 19th century European painters. Marcus checked the time, 5:17 a.m. Claire would be up soon. He wanted to make more progress before showing her, wanted to confirm what he was beginning to suspect before he voiced it aloud and risked looking foolish. He continued working, moving from the face to the woman's clothing. She wore something dark, a dress or jacket perhaps, painted in deep blues and blacks that had been obscured by the grime. The clothing's details were less defined than her face, but the overall composition was masterful, drawing the viewer's eye immediately to those compelling eyes and mysterious, almost smile. "Marcus, what are you doing out here?" He jumped at Claire's voice. She stood in the workshop doorway, wrapped in her bathrobe, hair tousled from sleep. "I couldn't stop thinking about it," he admitted. "I had to know." She crossed to the workbench, and he heard her sharp intake of breath as she saw what he'd revealed. "Oh my God, Marcus, that's beautiful." "It's more than beautiful," he said quietly. "Look at the technique, the brushwork, the way the paint's been layered. This isn't amateur work, Claire. This is something significant." She leaned closer, examining the partially cleaned canvas. "The style reminds me of... what's that period called? When the Impressionists were painting? Post-Impressionism? Maybe? Late 1800s, early 1900s. The date on the back said 1891, which would fit that period. Could it be someone famous? Even as she asked, Claire's practical nature reasserted itself. But that's crazy, right? A masterpiece hidden in an estate sale box? That only happens in movies. Usually, Marcus agreed. But not always. Remember that story from a few years ago? The couple who found a Caravaggio in their attic? That was in France, and they were aristocrats. This is Phoenix, Arizona, and the deceased was a retired school teacher. So how did a retired school teacher end up with what might be a 19th century European masterpiece hidden in her spare room? The question hung between them, pregnant with possibility and impossibility in equal measure. Claire pulled up a stool. "Keep cleaning. Let's see the whole thing before we start making wild assumptions." Marcus returned to his work, now with an audience. As dawn light began filtering through the workshop's single window, more of the painting revealed itself. The woman's hands, delicately rendered, one resting in her lap, the other barely visible at the edge of the frame. The suggestion of a chair or sofa behind her. A few loose brushstrokes in the upper right that might indicate a window or doorway. By 8 a.m., he'd cleaned about 70% of the canvas. The transformation was remarkable. What had been an unidentifiable dirty painting was now clearly a portrait of extraordinary quality. "We need to find out more," Claire said, "about the provenance, the artist, everything." The writing on the back, Marcus remembered. He carefully turned the canvas over, noticing details he'd missed in his initial examination. The frame was old, certainly period appropriate, with hand-cut joints that predated modern manufacturing techniques. The canvas itself was mounted on the frame with square-cut nails, another indicator of age. Together, they examined the handwritten text on the back of the canvas. Time and handling had faded the ink, but under proper lighting, they could make out several lines of elegant script. "That's definitely French," Claire said. "I took 4 years of French in high school and college. Let me see if I can make it out." She studied the writing carefully, occasionally pulling out her phone to check translations of unfamiliar words. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she deciphered the text. "What does it say?" Marcus finally asked, unable to contain his impatience. Claire looked up at him, her face pale. "If I'm reading this correctly, it says something like, 'Portrait of Mademoiselle,' something. I can't make out the name. Executed in Paris, 1891. Then there's what looks like initials or a signature, T and R, maybe? Or it could be P and R. The handwriting makes it hard to tell." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Paris, 1891. That's right in the heart of post-impressionism. Do you know who was working in Paris then? "We need to research this properly," Claire said, already heading back toward the house. "I'm going to make coffee and start Googling. You keep cleaning. Let's see the whole painting." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Marcus completed the cleaning, revealing the full composition in all its subtle beauty. The painting wasn't large or dramatic, no grand historical scene or sweeping landscape. It was simply a young woman captured in a moment of quiet contemplation, rendered with extraordinary skill and psychological insight. Meanwhile, Claire had transformed their dining room table into a research station. Her laptop was open to multiple browser tabs, surrounded by notepads where she'd been taking notes. Several books from her personal library lay scattered about art history volumes she'd collected during her years as a librarian. There were so many artists working in Paris in 1891, she reported when Marcus came in for lunch. The city was the center of the art world. Monet, Renoir, Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, Van Gogh, though he'd already left for the south of France by then. Gauguin was about to leave for Tahiti. It's overwhelming trying to narrow it down. What about those initials on the back? TR or PR? That's the problem. I found at least 15 notable artists whose names could match those initials, depending on how we're interpreting the handwriting. Pierre-Auguste Renoir is the most famous PR, but his style doesn't match our painting. Toulouse-Lautrec could be TR, but again, the style isn't quite right. Marcus poured himself coffee and sat across from her, studying the painting now propped against the wall where they could both see it. The young woman gazed back at them, her expression simultaneously distant and intimate, as if she was looking through them rather than at them. "There's something about her eyes," he murmured. "The way they're painted, it's like she's alive, really present, not just a representation of a person, but a captured soul." Claire nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. I've been staring at her all morning, and it's like she's about to speak." Whoever painted this understood not just technique, but psychology. They saw into this woman's character and captured it. Could we be wrong about this? Could it just be a really good amateur painting? Look at the brushwork, Marcus. The way the paint is layered, the understanding of light and shadow, the composition. This isn't amateur work. This is someone who'd spent years, maybe decades, perfecting their craft. They sat in silence, contemplating the implications. If this really was a significant artwork from the late 19th century, its value could be substantial. But more than the potential monetary worth, they both felt the weight of responsibility. If they'd stumbled onto something historically important, they had an obligation to handle it properly. "We need expert opinions," Claire finally said. "Real experts, not just internet research. Where do we even start? It's not like we can walk into a museum and say, 'Hey, we think we found a masterpiece in a box of junk.'" "Actually," Claire said slowly, "that's exactly what we might need to do." She turned her laptop toward him, showing a web page for the Phoenix Art Museum. They have a curatorial staff, conservation experts, people who could at least point us in the right direction. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness. What if we're completely wrong? What if we look like fools? "Then we look like fools," Claire replied firmly. "But what if we're right, and we don't pursue this? What if this painting represents someone's lost legacy, a piece of art history that's been missing for over a century? Don't we owe it to the artist, whoever they were, to find out? Her words struck a chord. Marcus thought about his own work, the furniture pieces he'd lovingly restored over the decades. Each one represented someone's craftsmanship, their vision and skill made tangible. The idea that such work could simply disappear, forgotten and dismissed as junk, pained him deeply. Okay, he agreed. Let's contact the museum, but let's also keep researching on our own. The more information we have, the better prepared we'll be when we talk to experts. They spent the rest of that day diving deeper into art history. Claire, with her librarian's research skills, created a systematic approach. She compiled lists of artists active in Paris in 1891, focusing on portraitists. She researched common painting techniques of the period, comparing them to what they could observe in their canvas. She even found academic papers discussing lost or stolen artworks from the late 19th century. Marcus, meanwhile, focused on the physical object itself. He examined the frame more closely, finding maker's marks that suggested it was indeed French and period appropriate. He studied the canvas weave under magnification, comparing it to reference images of 19th century materials. He even carefully removed a tiny thread from the edge of the canvas, thinking it might be useful for dating analysis if they got that far. As evening approached, they'd made frustratingly little progress in identifying the artist. The initials on the back remained ambiguous, and the style, while clearly professional and period appropriate, didn't definitively match any single well-known artist. Maybe that's actually a good sign, Claire suggested as they picked at a simple dinner of pasta and salad. If it was obviously a famous painter, someone would have recognized it before now. The fact that it's ambiguous might mean it's someone less well-known, maybe someone whose work has been lost or forgotten. Or it could just mean we have no idea what we're looking at, Marcus countered, though without real conviction. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something significant. That night, Claire drafted an email to the Phoenix Art Museum's curatorial department, carefully describing their discovery without making any grand claims. She explained that they'd acquired a 19th century painting that appeared to be of high quality and possible historical interest, and asked if someone could recommend next steps for authentication and evaluation. "I'm emphasizing that we're not trying to sell anything," she told Marcus as she proofread the message. "We're just seeking information and guidance. That seems less likely to get dismissed as cranks trying to make a quick buck." "Good thinking," Marcus agreed. "And it's true. I mean, yes, if this turns out to be valuable, we need to think about what to do with it. But right now, I'm more curious than greedy." Claire sent the email, and they both felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The ball was rolling now, and whatever came next would be out of their direct control. The following morning brought unexpected developments. Marcus was in the workshop, beginning to clean one of the picture frames from the estate sale boxes, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a Phoenix number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Webb, this is Jennifer Harding from the Phoenix Art Museum. I received your wife's email last night about a painting you've acquired." Marcus's heart rate accelerated. He hadn't expected such a quick response. "Yes, that's right. Thank you for calling back so promptly. I have to admit, I was intrigued by your description. Would it be possible for me to see the painting in person? I have some time this afternoon if you're available." They arranged for Jennifer to visit at 2 p.m., and Marcus immediately called Claire, who was at her weekly book club meeting. "Someone from the museum is coming this afternoon," he reported. "A curator named Jennifer Harding." "That was fast," Claire said. "I'll be home by 1. We should prepare for this, Marcus. Clean up the workshop, maybe have the painting in good light." The next few hours were a flurry of preparation. They tidied the workshop, positioned the painting on an easel under their best work lights, and gathered all the documentation they'd compiled. Photographs of the painting before and during cleaning, close-ups of details, images of the handwriting on the back, and notes from their research. Jennifer Harding arrived precisely at 2 p.m. She was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled into a professional bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. She carried a professional camera and what looked like a specialized flashlight. "Mr. and Mrs. Webb, thank you for reaching out to the museum. I have to say, your email was one of the more interesting ones I've received in my 3 years in this position. They led her to the workshop, where the painting waited on its easel. Jennifer stopped in the doorway, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to genuine interest in a split second. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh my." She approached the painting slowly, almost reverently, her eyes scanning every inch of the canvas. She didn't touch it, but moved around it, viewing it from different angles and distances. The silence stretched on, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street. Finally, she spoke. "Tell me everything. Where did you find this? How did you acquire it? What do you know about its history?" Marcus and Claire took turns explaining the story. The estate sale, the boxes of miscellaneous items, finding the wrapped canvas at the bottom of one box, the careful cleaning process, and their subsequent research attempts. Jennifer listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook she'd produced from her bag. When they finished, she turned back to the painting. "May I examine it more closely? I won't touch it without gloves, but I'd like to use this UV light to check some details." "Of course," Marcus agreed. Jennifer pulled on white cotton gloves and retrieved her specialized flashlight, which she explained was actually a UV imaging device. She moved it slowly across the canvas surface, studying something Marcus couldn't see. "The paint is responding exactly as I'd expect for genuine period materials," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "No evidence of modern synthetic pigments, the crack allure. Pattern is consistent with genuine aging, not artificially induced." She spent nearly 30 minutes examining every aspect of the painting, the canvas, the frame, the mounting hardware, and especially the handwriting on the back. Finally, she stepped away and faced Marcus and Claire directly. "I need to be very careful about what I say right now," she began. "I'm a curator, not a conservator or authentication specialist. But based on my preliminary examination, I can tell you this. You have a genuine 19th century painting of significant quality. The materials, the technique, the level of skill demonstrated, all of it is consistent with a professional European artist working in the late 1800s. Marcus felt Claire grip his hand tightly. "As for who painted it," Jennifer continued, "that's going to require much more research and possibly scientific analysis. But I can tell you that the style and execution are reminiscent of certain post-impressionist portraitists. The psychological depth, the loose handling of the background while maintaining sharp focus on the subject's face, these are characteristic techniques of that period and movement." "Do you think it could be someone famous?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer hesitated. "I don't want to raise false hopes or make claims I can't support. But yes, it's possible. There are several notable artists from this period whose work occasionally surfaces in unexpected places. Lost paintings, forgotten inheritances, pieces that were sold or given away and then lost track of over the decades." She pulled out her phone and showed them several images. "Look at the treatment of the eyes in your painting and compare it to this portrait by Pierre Bonnard. Similar intensity and psychological presence. Or this one, see how the subject seems to emerge from an undefined background? That's a technique several post-impressionists employed." Marcus studied the comparison images, his excitement building. The similarities were striking, yet their painting also had unique qualities that set it apart. "What happens now?" he asked. "With your permission, I'd like to photograph the painting and share the images with some colleagues, people who specialize in this period and style. I'd also strongly recommend having it examined by a professional conservator and potentially subjected to scientific analysis. There are techniques for dating canvas and paint that could help narrow down the time frame and possibly even the geographic origin." "What would that cost?" Claire asked practically. "We're not wealthy people. We bought this for $100 as part of a lot of estate sale junk." Jennifer smiled sympathetically. "I understand. But here's the thing. If this painting is what I think it might be, its value would far exceed any authentication costs. And there are institutions and organizations that might be willing to cover those costs in exchange for being involved in the discovery and authentication process." "You mean like a museum?" Marcus asked. "Possibly. Or a university with an art history program. Or even a private foundation dedicated to art preservation and research. The point is, you wouldn't necessarily have to fund the entire authentication process yourselves." She spent another hour with them, photographing the painting from every angle, documenting details of the frame and canvas construction and carefully transcribing the handwriting on the back. Before leaving, she provided them with recommendations for proper storage and handling. Keep it out of direct sunlight, maintain stable temperature and humidity if possible, and please don't attempt any further cleaning or restoration. What you've done so far was actually quite good, careful and conservative, but from this point forward, only professional conservators should touch it. After Jennifer left, Marcus and Claire stood in the workshop, staring at the painting that had so suddenly and dramatically entered their lives. "Did that really just happen?" Claire asked. "I think we might have actually found something important," Marcus replied, his voice filled with wonder. $100, Claire. We bought this for $100. "We bought 20 boxes of junk for $100, she corrected. "This just happened to be in one of them." They both started laughing, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. The absurdity of the situation, the sheer improbability of it all, was overwhelming. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked. "We wait," Claire said. "We wait for Jennifer to contact us with more information, and we keep researching on our own. And we hope that this is real, that we've stumbled onto something genuinely significant." That night, neither of them could sleep. They lay in bed, talking in hushed voices about possibilities and implications. If the painting proved to be a lost masterpiece, their lives would change dramatically. But even beyond the potential financial windfall, there was something deeper at stake: the preservation of art history, the recovery of a lost piece of cultural heritage, the restoration of an artist's legacy. "Do you think Evelyn Hartley knew what she had?" Claire wondered aloud. "The woman who owned it, do you think she knew?" "Maybe," Marcus said. "That might explain why it was wrapped so carefully and hidden at the bottom of a box rather than hung on a wall or stored with the other paintings. Or maybe she was just protecting what she thought was a family heirloom without knowing its true significance. They would probably never know for certain. Evelyn Hartley had taken whatever knowledge she possessed to her grave, and her nephew had been too disinterested to preserve even basic family records. As dawn approached and they finally drifted into restless sleep, the painting waited in the workshop below, silent witness to the storm of activity and emotion it had inspired. The young woman in the portrait gazed out with her knowing, almost smile, as if she'd always known she'd be found eventually, as if she'd been waiting patiently for over a century for someone to look closely enough to see her true significance. 3 days after Jennifer Harding's visit, Marcus received an email that made his hands tremble as he read it. Claire was at her volunteer shift at the local library when his phone chimed with the notification. He'd been in the workshop, carefully organizing the remaining estate sale items, but the subject line stopped him cold. Urgent. Your painting, exceptional findings. He opened the email immediately, his eyes racing across Jennifer's words. She'd shared the photographs with 5 leading experts in 19th century European art. 3 had responded within hours, unprecedented speed in the typically slow-moving world of art authentication. All 3 had expressed intense interest and requested immediate access to the physical painting for examination. "Marcus, this is highly unusual," Jennifer had written. "I've worked in this field for 15 years, and I've never seen this kind of rapid, unanimous response. One of the experts, Dr. Catherine Moreau from the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, actually called me at midnight Paris time because she couldn't wait until morning. She's flying to Phoenix next week and wants to examine the painting personally." Marcus read the email 3 times, each reading making the reality sink deeper. The Musée d'Orsay, one of the world's premier institutions for 19th century French art. Their curator was flying across the Atlantic to see a painting he'd bought for $100 at an estate sale. He immediately called Claire. "You need to come home," he said without preamble, "right now." "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine. Just come home. I'll explain when you get here." 20 minutes later, Claire burst through the front door, slightly out of breath from hurrying. Marcus met her with his laptop, the email still displayed on the screen. She read in silence, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to disbelief. When she finished, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "The Musée d'Orsay," she whispered. "Marcus, that's where they keep the Impressionists. Monet, Renoir, Van Gogh." "I know. She's flying here. From Paris. For our painting." I know. They stared at each other, the magnitude of the situation settling over them like a physical weight. This was no longer a curious find or an interesting mystery. This was something that had captured the attention of one of the world's most prestigious art institutions. "We need to prepare," Claire said, her practical nature reasserting itself. "If Dr. Moreau is coming next week, we need to document everything we know, organize all our research, and make sure the painting is properly protected." Over the next several days, they threw themselves into preparation. Claire created a detailed timeline of events: when they'd acquired the painting, the cleaning process, their initial research, and Jennifer's preliminary examination. She compiled all their photographs into organized digital folders, carefully labeled and dated. Marcus, meanwhile, consulted with Jennifer about proper handling and storage protocols. She recommended a climate-controlled environment, so they converted a small closet in their house, installing a dehumidifier and thermometer to maintain stable conditions. The painting was carefully wrapped and moved from the workshop to this new temporary home. They also continued their own research, now with renewed urgency. Claire spent hours in the Phoenix Central Library poring over art history books and exhibition catalogs. Marcus contacted other furniture restorers he knew, asking if anyone had experience with 19th century French pieces that might provide context for their find. One evening, Claire made a breakthrough. She'd been examining enlarged photographs of the handwriting on the back of the canvas, comparing it to samples of various artists' scripts she'd found in academic databases. "Marcus, look at this." She called from the dining room, where she'd once again spread out her research materials. He joined her, looking at her laptop screen, which displayed two images side by side. On the left was a photograph of the writing on their painting's back. On the right was a sample of handwritten text from an archival document. The formation of the letters, Claire pointed to specific characters. "Look at the way the R curves and how the T is crossed. It's almost identical." "Whose handwriting is that?" Marcus asked. "That's the problem. This sample isn't from the artist. It's from an art dealer named Julien Renaud, who operated in Paris in the 1892. He was known for representing several post-impressionist painters and keeping meticulous records of his sales and acquisitions." Marcus studied the comparison. The similarity was striking. So our painting might have passed through his hands? Possibly, which could be incredibly helpful for provenance. Renaud's business records were donated to the Archives Nationales in Paris after his death. If our painting was documented in those records, we'd have solid proof of its history and potentially the artist's identity. Can we access those records? Not easily. They're not digitized, and you need special permission to examine them in person, but Dr. Moreau would have access. She could research this when she returns to Paris. They added this discovery to their growing documentation, excitement building with each new piece of information. The painting was starting to reveal its secrets, like an ancient manuscript slowly becoming legible. Jennifer called 2 days before Dr. Moreau's scheduled arrival with additional news. 2 other experts had also requested permission to examine the painting: Dr. Harold Brighton from Yale University's Art History Department, and Antoine Dubois, an independent art authenticator based in New York who specialized in 19th century French painting. "They're all coming to Phoenix within the next 10 days, Jennifer explained. "I've arranged for the examinations to take place at the museum, where we have proper facilities and equipment. Mr. Webb, Mrs. Webb, I need to be honest with you. This level of interest suggests something extraordinary. These people don't travel lightly or waste time on minor discoveries." The morning of Dr. Moreau's examination arrived with cloudless Arizona skies and temperatures already climbing toward triple digits. Marcus and Claire had barely slept, their nervous anticipation keeping them awake until the early hours. They arrived at the Phoenix Art Museum at 9 a.m., carefully transporting the painting in a custom crate Marcus had built, according to Jennifer's specifications. Dr. Catherine Moreau was already waiting in the examination room, a white-walled space with specialized lighting and various pieces of scientific equipment Marcus didn't recognize. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and intense dark eyes that immediately fixed on the crate containing the painting. "Monsieur and Madame Webb," she greeted them, her French accent lending musicality to her English. Thank you for allowing me to examine this work. Jennifer's photographs were tantalizing, but photographs never tell the complete story. Jennifer helped Marcus carefully remove the painting from its crate and position it on an examination easel under optimal lighting. The moment the canvas was revealed, Dr. Moreau's entire demeanor changed. She stepped closer, her breath catching audibly. "Mon Dieu," she whispered, "it's even more remarkable in person." For the next 6 hours, Dr. Moreau conducted the most thorough examination Marcus had ever witnessed. She used a variety of tools and techniques: UV imaging to check for overpainting or restoration, infrared reflectography to see beneath the surface layers, detailed microscopic examination of the brushwork, and careful analysis of the paint composition using a portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometer. Throughout the process, she maintained a running commentary in a mixture of English and French, occasionally asking Jennifer to document specific observations. Marcus and Claire watched from chairs along the wall, afraid to interrupt but desperate to know what she was finding. Finally, as afternoon stretched toward evening, Dr. Moreau stepped back from the painting and turned to face them. Her expression was carefully controlled, but Marcus could see excitement dancing in her eyes. "Before I share my conclusions, I must tell you some history," she began. In 1891, a young painter was working in Paris, relatively unknown outside certain artistic circles. This painter created portraits that were extraordinary in their psychological depth, works that seemed to capture not just physical appearance, but the inner essence of the subject. She gestured to their painting. This artist produced perhaps 20 such portraits over a 2-year period before shifting focus to other subjects and styles. Of those 20 portraits, only 12 have been accounted for in museum collections and private holdings. 8 are missing, their locations unknown for over a century. Marcus felt Claire's hand find his, squeezing tightly. "The style, the technique, the composition of your painting," Dr. Moreau continued, "they are entirely consistent with these known works. The brushwork, in particular, the way the background dissolves into abstraction while the face maintains sharp focus, is a signature characteristic." "Who?" Marcus managed to ask, his voice rough. "Who was the artist?" Dr. Moreau smiled. "I cannot make a definitive attribution based solely on stylistic analysis. That would be irresponsible. However, I can tell you that the evidence strongly suggests this painting was created by Theodore Roussel." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but Jennifer's sharp intake of breath suggested its significance. Theodore Roussel, Dr. Moreau explained, was a French post-impressionist painter who worked primarily in Paris and London. He was associated with Whistler and the aesthetic movement. His portrait work from the early 1890s is considered among the finest of the period, subtle, psychological, technically brilliant. "But not famous?" Claire asked. "Not to the general public, no. He's known primarily to specialists and serious collectors. His major works reside in institutions like the Musée d'Orsay, the National Gallery in London, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But he never achieved the popular recognition of peers like Monet or Renoir." What happens next will turn this discovery upside down, reveal a truth that connects this painting to one of history's greatest art mysteries, and prove that sometimes the most valuable treasures hide in the most unexpected places. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales. However, Dr. Moreau continued, her tone shifting. "There is something else you need to understand. In 1892, several of Roussel's portraits were exhibited at a small gallery in Montmartre. The exhibition received excellent reviews, and several pieces were sold to private collectors. But after the exhibition closed, 8 paintings disappeared. They were never seen again." "Disappeared? How?" Marcus asked. "That remains a mystery. Some historians believe they were sold to a single collector who later lost or concealed them. Others think they were stolen or destroyed. For over 130 years, these paintings have been considered among the most significant lost works of the post-impressionist period." She turned back to their painting. "If this is one of those lost works, and I believe it very likely is, then you haven't just found a valuable painting. You've recovered a missing piece of art, history." The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Marcus thought about Evelyn Hartley, the unknown woman whose estate sale had yielded this treasure. How had she come to possess it? Had she known what it was? "What's the next step?" Claire asked practically. "Comprehensive authentication," Dr. Moreau replied. "Scientific dating of the canvas and paint materials, analysis of the signature handwriting on the back, research into provenance and exhibition history. The painting must be examined by multiple experts and subjected to rigorous testing before any definitive attribution can be made." "And if it is authenticated as a Roussel?" Marcus pressed. "Dr." Moreau paused, choosing her words carefully. "A authenticated Roussel portrait from this period, particularly one of the lost 1,892 works, would be extraordinarily valuable. His authenticated portraits have sold at auction for between $15 and $40 million, depending on size and condition." The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. $40 million. He'd bought this painting as part of a $100 lot of estate sale junk. The disparity was so absurd, it seemed almost laughable. However, Dr. Moreau continued, value is secondary to historical significance. If this painting can be definitively authenticated and connected to the 1,892 exhibition, it would rewrite our understanding of Roussel's career and potentially lead to discovering the fate of the other missing works. Over the following week, the authentication process intensified. Dr. Brighton from Yale arrived and conducted his own examination, focusing particularly on the technical aspects of the painting's construction. He carefully analyzed the canvas weave, frame construction, and paint application techniques, comparing them to known Roussel works. His conclusion aligned with Dr. Moreau's. The painting was almost certainly genuine and period-appropriate, with strong evidence suggesting Roussel's authorship. Antoine Dubois, the independent authenticator, approached the examination with pronounced skepticism, a professional stance meant to protect against wishful thinking and fraud. He spent 2 full days examining every millimeter of the canvas, looking for any sign of forgery, artificial aging, or modern materials. "I wanted to find problems," he admitted to Marcus and Claire after completing his analysis. "That's my job, to be the voice of doubt, to find the flaws everyone else missed. But this painting resists every challenge I've thrown at it. The materials are genuine period items, the aging patterns are natural, the technique is consistent with documented Roussel works, and most convincingly, the psychological sophistication of the portrait itself is beyond the capability of forgers." He paused, then added, "I've examined over 300 claimed discoveries in my career. Perhaps 15 proved genuine. This is number 16. Jennifer coordinated the scientific testing, arranging for samples microscopic amounts of paint and canvas fiber to be sent to specialized laboratories. Radiocarbon dating would determine the age of the canvas materials. Paint composition analysis would identify the specific pigments used and compare them to Roussel's known palette. Infrared imaging would reveal any underdrawing or pentimenti changes the artist made during the painting process. Each test took time, and waiting became its own form of torture for Marcus and Claire. They tried to maintain normal routines, continuing their work at Dorothy May's diner, but the painting dominated their thoughts and conversations. The media had somehow gotten wind of the story. A small article appeared in the Arizona Republic about a significant art discovery being authenticated at the Phoenix Art Museum. The article didn't name Marcus and Claire or provide details, but it sparked interest. Their phone began ringing with calls from reporters, art dealers, and curious strangers. Jennifer advised them to say nothing publicly until authentication was complete. "Premature announcements have destroyed credibility in cases like this," she explained. "We need absolute certainty before making any public claims." Frank Kowalski, their trucker friend who'd helped them settle in Millbrook months ago, called after seeing the news article. "Is that painting they're talking about the one from the estate sale?" he asked. "The one you bought for $100? Marcus confirmed it was. "Holy hell," Frank said. "You two might have just won the lottery without buying a ticket." But the attention wasn't entirely positive. One afternoon, a man in an expensive suit appeared at their door, introducing himself as a lawyer representing Evelyn Hartley's nephew, the one who'd authorized the estate sale. "My client believes there may have been a misunderstanding about the contents of those boxes you purchased," the lawyer said smoothly. He was under the impression they contained only worthless items. If there was indeed valuable property included, we need to discuss appropriate compensation. Claire, drawing on her decades of experience dealing with difficult library patrons, handled the situation with firm politeness. We purchased the boxes legally for the asking price from authorized estate liquidators. We have receipts and documentation. If your client had concerns about the contents, he should have examined them before authorizing their sale. The lawyer tried several more approaches, suggesting the nephew hadn't understood what he was authorizing, implying that elderly buyers might have taken advantage of the situation, hinting at potential legal action. But Claire remained unmoved, and eventually he departed with veiled threats about seeing what our options are. The incident left them both shaken. Marcus hadn't considered that their discovery might invite challenges to their ownership. "We need our own lawyer," he said after the man left. "Someone who specializes in property law and can protect our interests." Jennifer connected them with a firm that had experience with art ownership disputes. The attorney they met with, Sarah Chin, reviewed the documentation of their purchase and provided reassuring news. "You have clear legal ownership," she confirmed. The boxes were legally sold by authorized representatives of the estate. The nephew's regret about not examining the contents more carefully doesn't create grounds for reversal. That said, I'd recommend we send a formal cease and desist letter making our position clear, just to establish that you won't be intimidated. As weeks passed, test results began returning from the various laboratories. Each one added another piece to the authentication puzzle. The radiocarbon dating confirmed the canvas dated to the late 19th century, consistent with the 1891 date written on the back. The paint analysis revealed pigments and binding media characteristic of the period, with no evidence of modern synthetic materials. The infrared imaging showed underdrawing and composition changes consistent with an artist working directly on canvas, not copying from a predetermined source, a sign of original creation rather than forgery. Most intriguingly, the handwriting analysis confirmed Claire's earlier discovery. The script on the painting's back matched samples from art dealer Julien Renaud's records, suggesting the painting had indeed passed through his Paris gallery in the 1892. Dr. Moreau traveled to Paris to research Renaud's archive business records. She spent 3 days in the Archives Nationales, carefully examining leather-bound ledgers and boxes of correspondence. When she emailed her findings to Jennifer, Marcus, and Claire, the subject line read, "Confirmed. Provenance established." In Renaud's ledger for March 1892, Dr. Moreau had found an entry, received from T. Roussel, portrait of Mademoiselle Beaumont. Oil on canvas, 24x 36 inches. Price, 300 francs. Status, consignment. 2 months later, another entry noted, portrait of Menomai Beaumont sold to American collector Mr. J. Hartford, New York. Price, 650 francs. Commission, 150 francs. Payment to T. Roussel, 500 francs. "This is the smoking gun," Dr. Moreau wrote in her email. "We now have documented proof that Théodore Roussel created a portrait titled Mademoiselle Beaumont in 1891 or early 1892, consigned it to Julien Renaud's gallery, and it was sold to an American collector named J. Hartford from New York. The dimensions match your painting exactly." The discovery prompted new research into J. Hartford's identity and the painting's subsequent journey from New York to Arizona. This proved more challenging. Hartford was a common surname, and records from the 1892 were incomplete. However, a researcher at the New York Historical Society found a promising lead. A James Hartford had been a textile merchant who traveled frequently to Europe in the 1882 and 1890. His obituary from 1923 mentioned his extensive collection of European paintings, which had been distributed among family members after his death. Tracing the Hartford family tree forward through the decades, researchers discovered that James Hartford's granddaughter had married a military officer stationed in Arizona in the 1952. The couple had settled in Phoenix after his retirement. That could be our connection, Claire realized. The painting came to Arizona through the Hartford family and somehow ended up in Evelyn Hartley's possession. Further investigation revealed that Evelyn Hartley's maiden name was Hartford. She was James Hartford's great-great-granddaughter. The painting had been passed down through her family for over a century, its significance forgotten or unknown as generations turned over and memories faded. She probably had no idea what she owned, Marcus said quietly. It was just an old family painting, stuck in a box in her spare room, waiting to be discovered. By mid-September, 3 months after Marcus had first cleaned the surface grime to reveal the mysterious portrait beneath, the authentication process reached its conclusion. A panel of 5 experts, Dr. Moreau, Dr. Brighton, Antoine Dubois, and 2 additional specialists brought in for final review, met at the Phoenix Art Museum to render their collective judgment. Marcus and Claire were invited to attend. They sat in uncomfortable chairs in a conference room, holding hands tightly, as the experts presented their findings. Each specialist outlined their examination process and conclusions. The scientific evidence was unanimous. The painting dated to the early 1890 seconds and used materials and techniques consistent with that period. The stylistic analysis strongly suggested Roussel's authorship. The provenance research had established a clear chain of custody from Roussel's studio to the present day. Finally, Dr. Moreau stood to deliver the panel's collective verdict. Based on comprehensive technical analysis, stylistic examination, and provenance research, it is the unanimous conclusion of this panel that the painting known as Portrait of Mademoiselle Beaumont is an authentic work by Théodore Roussel, created in 1891 and exhibited in Paris in 1892 before being sold to an American collector. She paused, letting the words settle. Furthermore, we conclude that this painting is one of the 8 lost works from Roussel's critically acclaimed 1892 exhibition, making it not only a significant artistic achievement, but also a major historical rediscovery. The room erupted in applause. Jennifer was crying openly, and several of the experts were shaking hands and congratulating each other. In the midst of the celebration, Marcus and Claire sat quietly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd stumbled into. They'd bought a $100 box of junk and found a masterpiece worth potentially $40 million. They'd recovered a lost piece of art history that experts had sought for over a century. And they'd proved that extraordinary discoveries still waited in the most ordinary places, if only someone looked closely enough to see them. As the meeting concluded and various people approached to offer congratulations, Marcus pulled Claire aside. "What do we do now?" he asked, the question he'd been holding since the authentication began. "I don't know," she admitted. "I honestly have no idea." But even as uncertainty about their future swirled around them, one thing had become absolutely clear. Their lives would never be the same again. The painting that had begun as a curiosity had become a phenomenon, and Marcus and Claire Webb had transformed from retired furniture restorers into the center of one of the art world's most remarkable discoveries in decades. The young woman in the portrait gazed out at them with her mysterious, almost smile, as if she'd known all along that patience and time would eventually reveal her true significance to the world. The authentication announcement transformed Marcus and Claire's quiet life into chaos almost overnight. Within hours of the panel's official verdict, news outlets across the country picked up the story. Arizona couple discovers $40 million masterpiece in estate sale junk screamed the headlines. By the next morning, their rental house was surrounded by news vans, reporters, and curious neighbors. Marcus stood at the window, looking out at the circus their street had become. A reporter was doing a stand-up piece in front of their house while a cameraman filmed. Another journalist was interviewing Howard Jenkins from the motel where they'd first stayed in Millbrook, asking him about the couple who'd briefly rented from him. "This is insane," he muttered. Claire joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Jennifer warned us this would happen," she reminded him. She said authenticated discoveries always attract media attention. "I know, but knowing something, intellectually and experiencing it are very different things." He turned to face her. "Claire, people are treating us like we won the lottery, but we haven't actually decided what to do with the painting yet." That was the crux of their current dilemma. The painting had been authenticated, its value confirmed, but now they faced the complicated question of what came next. Sell it Donate it to a museum? Keep it? Each option carried profound implications. Their lawyer, Sarah Chin, had scheduled a meeting for later that week to discuss their options. But first, they had to navigate the immediate media storm. Jennifer suggested they hold a brief press conference at the museum to satisfy public curiosity and hopefully reduce the constant siege of their home. The press conference was scheduled for 2 days later. In the interim, Marcus and Claire tried to process everything that had happened. They were still working their part-time jobs at Dorothy May's diner, partly because they needed the income. Nothing had actually changed financially yet, and partly because maintaining their routine felt important amid the chaos. Dorothy May had been thrilled by the news. "I always knew you two were special," she declared, pulling them both into enthusiastic hugs. $100 to $40 million? It's like something out of a movie. But not everyone was as purely supportive. Their daughter Jessica called from Oregon, her voice tight with an emotion Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Dad, I've been seeing the news stories," she began. "Is it true about the painting?" "It's true," Marcus confirmed. "We're still figuring out what to do with it." A long pause. That's incredible. Life-changing money." Another pause. "Thomas and Linda have been calling me. We've been talking about whether you and Mom might need help managing this, financial advisors, that kind of thing." Marcus felt a chill. "Jessica, we appreciate your concern, but we're not incapable of making our own decisions." "I know that, Dad, but this is enormous. And you and Mom, you're not exactly young anymore. We just want to make sure you're protected from people who might try to take advantage." After the call ended, Marcus relayed the conversation to Claire. She nodded slowly, unsurprised. "They're worried about their inheritance," she said bluntly, "or that we'll be swindled out of it before they can inherit anything." "That's a cynical view." "Maybe, but I've watched enough families tear themselves apart over money to recognize the signs." She squeezed his hand. "We need to be very careful, Marcus. Not just with strangers, but with everyone." The press conference drew over 50 journalists, far more than Jennifer had anticipated. The museum's auditorium was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious members of the public who'd heard about the event. Marcus and Claire sat at a table on stage, flanked by Jennifer and Dr. Moreau, who'd flown back to Phoenix specifically for this announcement. Dr. Moreau began with a formal presentation about the painting's authentication, the scientific processes involved, and its historical significance. She showed slides comparing their painting to known Rousseau works, pointing out stylistic similarities and unique characteristics. "This discovery rewrites our understanding of Theodore Rousseau's career," she explained. "It confirms historical accounts of the 1892 exhibition and provides crucial evidence about this pivotal period in post-impressionist portraiture." Then it was Marcus and Claire's turn to speak. Jennifer had coached them on handling questions, but nothing could fully prepare them for the barrage of inquiries. "How does it feel to know you bought a $40 million painting for $100? What are you going to do with the money? Will you sell the painting or donate it to a museum? Have you quit your jobs yet? Do you feel guilty that the original owner's family didn't benefit from this discovery?" That last question stung. Marcus exchanged glances with Claire before answering. "We purchased the painting legally from authorized estate liquidators," he said carefully. "The family had the opportunity to examine what they were selling and chose not to. We followed proper procedures, paid the asking price, and have been completely transparent throughout the authentication process." But the question nagged at him. Evelyn Hartley's nephew, who'd authorized the estate sale, had lost out on a fortune through his own negligence. Part of Marcus felt that was simple justice. The man had been too disinterested to properly value his aunt's possessions. But another part wondered if they had some moral obligation beyond their legal rights. After the press conference, they met with Sarah Chin, their attorney, along with a financial advisor she'd recommended. The advisor, Robert Patterson, specialized in sudden wealth management, helping lottery winners, inheritance recipients, and others who experience dramatic financial windfalls navigate their new circumstances. "First, let's talk about realistic expectations," Robert began. "The painting has been valued at potentially $40 million, but that's not the same as having $40 million in your bank account," he explained the complexities. If they sold the painting at auction, the auction house would take a significant commission, typically around 25% for a piece this valuable. Then there would be capital gains taxes on the sale, which could consume another large percentage depending on how the transaction was structured. Realistically, after all fees and taxes, you might net somewhere between $20 and $25 million from a sale, Robert explained. Still life-changing money, but considerably less than the headline figures. Marcus felt oddly relieved. $20 million was still an incomprehensible sum, but somehow less overwhelming than $40 million, Sarah outlined. Their primary options. They could sell the painting at auction through a major house like Christie's or Sotheby's, which would maximize the sale price but involve significant fees and public exposure. They could sell privately to a collector or institution, potentially receiving less money but with more control over the process. Or they could donate the painting to a museum, receiving a substantial tax deduction but no immediate cash. There's also a hybrid option, Sarah added. Some museums have funds to acquire major works. You could offer them first right of purchase at a reduced price, say $30 million instead of the $40 it might fetch at auction. They get the painting for less than fair market value, you get a guaranteed sale without auction fees, and you've ensured the painting remains accessible to the public. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Claire received offers from numerous sources. Major auction houses sent representatives to court them, promising record-breaking sales and international publicity. Private collectors expressed interest, some offering immediate payment of $35 million with no questions asked. Museums from Paris to New York made their cases for why the painting belonged in their collections. The Musée d'Orsay, represented by Dr. Moreau, made a particularly compelling presentation. They offered $32 million, their entire annual acquisition budget for the next 3 years, and promised to display the painting prominently in their Roussel gallery alongside the artist's other major works. This painting belongs with its siblings, Dr. Moreau argued passionately. Theodore Roussel's body of work tells a story, and your painting is a missing chapter. Reuniting it with his other portraits would serve scholarship, public education, and the artist's legacy. But the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York countered with their own offer, $30 million plus a named gallery space. The Webb Gallery of Post-Impressionist Portraiture would house not only their Roussel but also related works from the museum's collection, ensuring their names would be permanently associated with this discovery. Marcus and Claire found themselves in the surreal position of choosing between institutions they'd only ever visited as tourists, each offering sums of money they'd never imagined possessing. The attention also brought unexpected consequences. Their landlord, realizing his tenants were about to become multi-millionaires, suddenly demanded they move out, claiming he needed the house for family. Dorothy May faced increased rent on her diner's building, the owner apparently believing she could afford higher payments given her employees' newfound wealth. "This is exactly what I was worried about," Claire said after receiving an eviction notice. "Everyone sees dollar signs and suddenly treats us differently. Even their relationships with friends became strained." Frank Kowalski remained steady, still checking in regularly without any apparent agenda, but others who'd barely known them suddenly became overly friendly, inviting them to dinners and events they'd never been included in before. Their children's behavior became particularly troubling. Thomas, the software engineer, sent them a detailed proposal about creating a family trust and investment strategy. Linda suggested they purchase a large house where everyone could live together, like the old days. Jessica began making pointed comments about how she'd always supported them, implying that support should be financially rewarded. "They're not even trying to hide it," Marcus said bitterly after a particularly transparent phone call from Thomas. "They're already spending our money in their heads." Claire looked at the painting, which they'd brought home from the museum under heavy security and now kept in a temperature-controlled storage unit nearby. "Maybe we should make our decision based on what feels right, not what other people expect." That night, they sat together at their small dining table, making lists like they had when deciding to take Dorothy May's job offer. On one side, reasons to sell to the highest bidder. On the other, reasons to choose a specific museum or take a different path entirely. The sell for maximum profit column had obvious appeals: financial security for the rest of their lives, the ability to help their children and grandchildren, though current behavior made that less appealing. The freedom to travel, to pursue hobbies, to never worry about medical bills or retirement funds. But the other column held different values, ensuring the painting's preservation and public accessibility, honoring the artist's legacy, supporting institutions dedicated to education and culture, maintaining their own sense of identity and purpose rather than becoming the people who got rich from a lucky find. I keep thinking about Evelyn Hartley, Claire said quietly. The woman whose estate sale started all this. She kept this painting for decades, wrapped carefully, preserved safely. Even if she didn't know its exact value, she treasured it. You think she'd want it in a museum? Marcus asked. I think she'd want it to matter, to mean something beyond a price tag. Around midnight, they finally reached a decision. It wasn't the choice that would maximize their financial gain, but it felt right in a way the other options hadn't. The next morning, they called Sarah Chin and asked her to arrange a meeting with Dr. Moreau from the Musée d'Orsay and representatives from the Phoenix Art Museum. We have a proposal, Marcus told them when everyone had gathered, but it's unconventional. He outlined their plan. They would sell the painting to the Musée d'Orsay for $25 million below their original offer and significantly less than the painting would fetch at auction. However, the sale came with conditions. First, the Musée d'Orsay would loan the painting back to the Phoenix Art Museum for 1 year before taking permanent possession, allowing the local community that had supported the discovery to experience it firsthand. Second, $5 million of the sale price would be donated to establish an endowment at the Phoenix Art Museum for conservation and authentication of undiscovered artworks. The fund would help other people who might stumble onto hidden treasures get proper expert evaluation regardless of their ability to pay. Third, $2 million would go to establish scholarship funds at their children's schools, art education programs that would bear Evelyn Hartley's name, honoring the woman whose unwitting preservation of the painting had made this all possible. That leaves us with $18 million, Marcus explained. After taxes, probably around $10 or $11 million. It's far more than we ever expected to have, and more than enough for our needs. Dr. Moreau's eyes were bright with emotion. This is extraordinarily generous. The museum will be honored to accept these terms. Jennifer from the Phoenix Art Museum looks stunned. $5 million for conservation and authentication? That will change countless lives, help discover and preserve works that might otherwise be lost. The paperwork took weeks to finalize. During that time, Marcus and Claire faced criticism from various quarters. Their children were furious about the wasted millions. Financial advisors called the donations foolish. Some reporters portrayed them as naive elderly people who didn't understand the value of what they'd found. But others understood. Dorothy May hugged them both fiercely when they told her. "You chose meaning over money," she said. "That's rare these days." Frank nodded approvingly. "My mother always said the measure of a person is what they do when they could get away with being selfish." You two measured up. The painting's public unveiling at the Phoenix Art Museum drew thousands of visitors. Marcus and Claire attended the opening reception, watching people crowd around the portrait of Mademoiselle Beaumont, leaning close to study her enigmatic expression, reading the detailed description cards that explained the painting's journey from Roussel's Paris studio to an Arizona estate sale to its rediscovery. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood transfixed in front of the painting. "She looks like she knows a secret," the girl told her mother. Claire smiled, remembering her own first clear view of the painting after Marcus's initial cleaning. "She does, doesn't she?" The formal transfer to the Musée d'Orsay was scheduled for the following year. Dr. Moreau arranged for Marcus and Claire to visit Paris for the installation, with all expenses paid. They would see the painting take its place among Roussel's other works, completing a collection that had been fragmented for over a century. But before that, they had more immediate concerns. With their impending financial security, they'd given notice at Dorothy May's diner, though she'd begged them to stay. "You don't need the money anymore," she acknowledged. "But I still need the help, and more than that, I value your company. Would you consider staying just for the friendship of it?" They agreed to continue working reduced hours, not for the wages, but because the routine and community mattered to them. The diner had become part of their identity in Millbrook, and walking away completely felt like losing something valuable. Their relationship with their children remained complicated. Thomas had stopped calling after they finalized the museum deals. Jessica sent terse text messages instead of having actual conversations. Only Linda, perhaps due to her nursing background and daily exposure to people in difficult circumstances, seemed to understand their choices. "I get it," she told them during a rare phone call. "You wanted to do something meaningful, not just accumulate money. I'm proud of you both." Marcus and Claire used some of their windfall to purchase a small house in Millbrook, nothing ostentatious, just a comfortable 3-bedroom with a workshop for Marcus and a proper sewing room for Claire's quilting. They paid cash, avoiding the mortgage they'd never thought they'd escape at their age. They also established modest trust funds for each of their children and grandchildren, not enough to stop working, but enough to provide security during emergencies. The trust came with a letter explaining their philosophy. Wealth should serve purpose, not become purpose itself. Some of their funds went to practical matters. They paid off medical debts that had accumulated over the years. They bought reliable vehicles to replace their aging truck. They set up their own retirement accounts, properly funded for the first time in their lives. But they also indulged in smaller dreams. Marcus bought high-quality woodworking tools he'd always coveted but couldn't afford. Claire ordered first editions of books she'd treasured as a librarian. They made donations to causes they cared about: the local library, veteran services for Frank's sake, and medical research focused on the conditions that had affected their health over the years. 6 months after the authentication, they attended the Evelyn Hartley Scholarship Awards at the elementary school in the Phoenix neighborhood, where she'd taught for 30 years. 20 students received funding for art supplies, summer programs, and educational enrichment. The school principal, a woman named Margaret Rodriguez, pulled them aside after the ceremony. "You know, I taught with Evelyn for 5 years before she retired. She would have loved this, her name attached to supporting young artists. She always said that art saved her life." "What do you mean?" Claire asked. Margaret smiled sadly. "Evelyn had a difficult childhood, lost her parents young, was raised by relatives who saw her as a burden. Art was her escape, her salvation. She collected paintings not because they were valuable, but because they reminded her that beauty and meaning existed even in hard times. The revelation reframed everything. Evelyn Hartley hadn't been a woman who'd carelessly allowed a masterpiece to languish in obscurity. She'd been someone who'd treasured art for its ability to transform suffering into something bearable, who'd preserved the painting because it mattered to her on a fundamental level. She kept it safe," Marcus said quietly. "For all those decades, she kept it safe until someone would recognize what it was." "You honored her," Margaret replied, "by making sure her name is remembered for supporting others the way art supported her." As spring arrived in Arizona, bringing temperatures that made Marcus grateful they'd installed good air conditioning in their new house, he and Claire prepared for their Paris trip. Dr. Moreau had arranged an elaborate itinerary: tours of museums, meetings with art historians, and formal dinners with French cultural officials. But Marcus was most excited about the simple moment when they'd stand in the Musée d'Orsay and see the painting in its permanent home, surrounded by its artistic siblings. The night before their flight, they sat on their new back patio, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in improbable colors. Rusty, their faithful golden retriever who'd been with them through everything, dozed at their feet. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked. "Selling for less than we could have gotten? Giving so much away?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what life would be like with an extra 10 or 15 million in the bank. But then I remember what really changed our lives. The painting itself? No, the process, the discovery, the authentication, the decisions we had to make about what mattered to us. If we'd just sold to the highest bidder and banked the money, we'd be richer, but less. I don't know, less ourselves maybe?" Claire nodded. "We could have become different people, the kind who measure worth in dollars. Instead, we got to affirm who we already were. Plus," Marcus added with a grin, "we're still millionaires, just not as many millions as we might have been." They laughed, the absurdity of their situation still capable of surprising them. A $100 gamble on estate sale leftovers had led to this: not just wealth, but purpose, meaning, and the satisfaction of having made choices aligned with their values. Their Paris trip exceeded expectations. The Musée d'Orsay treated them like dignitaries, though Marcus insisted they were just ordinary people who'd gotten extraordinarily lucky. The painting's installation ceremony was attended by French cultural ministers, art historians, and journalists from around the world. Seeing the portrait of Mademoiselle Beaumont hanging alongside Roussel's other masterpieces was profoundly moving. The young woman's enigmatic expression fit perfectly with her painted siblings' other portraits from that remarkable 1891 to 1892 period, each capturing a different subject, but all sharing that same psychological depth and technical mastery. "She's home," Claire whispered, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Moreau overheard and smiled. "Thanks to you, a lost piece of history has been recovered. This painting will be studied, appreciated, and preserved for generations. That's your legacy." But their true legacy, Marcus thought, wasn't just the painting's preservation. It was the scholarship supporting young artists in Evelyn Hartley's name. It was the authentication fund helping others discover hidden treasures. It was the example they'd set about choosing meaning over maximum profit. On their last night in Paris, they stood on a bridge over the Seine, watching the city lights reflect on the dark water. They'd walked these streets where Theodore Roussel had once walked, where he'd painted the portrait that would eventually find its way to an Arizona estate sale and change two lives forever. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. Claire turned to him. "For what?" "For being willing to spend $100 we couldn't really afford on boxes of junk because I had a feeling about an ugly painting. For supporting every strange instinct and crazy decision along the way." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for having those instincts in the first place, and for being the kind of man who cares more about doing right than getting rich." They returned to Millbrook changed in ways that had nothing to do with their bank account. Yes, they had financial security they'd never dreamed possible. But more importantly, they discovered that their values, the principles they'd lived by through decades of modest circumstances, still held when tested by sudden wealth. Dorothy May threw them a welcome home party at the diner, inviting everyone who'd become part of their Millbrook family. Frank was there with his mother, Ella, whose dementia had progressed, but who still smiled with genuine warmth when she saw them. The Quilting Circle members came, as did regulars from the diner who'd watched their story unfold with invested interest. "Speech!" someone called out, and the cry was taken up by others. Marcus stood reluctantly, unused to being the center of attention. "Claire and I just want to say, this community took us in when we were essentially homeless. You gave us work, friendship, and purpose when we most needed all three. The painting changed our bank balance, but you changed our lives. Thank you." The applause was generous, but what meant more to Marcus were the individual conversations that followed, people sharing how the story had inspired them, how it reminded them that extraordinary things could still happen to ordinary people, how their choices about the painting's sale had renewed others' faith in human goodness. As the party wound down and guests departed into the warm evening, Marcus and Claire helped Dorothy May clean up despite her protests that millionaires shouldn't be washing dishes. "We're not millionaires doing dishes," Claire corrected her. "We're friends helping a friend. The money doesn't change that." And it didn't. Over the following years, as the painting's fame grew and Roussel's reputation was reassessed in light of the recovered masterpiece, Marcus and Claire maintained the life they'd built in Millbrook. They traveled occasionally, visited museums with new appreciation, and provided quiet support to causes they cared about. But mostly, they lived simply, finding satisfaction in daily routines, community connections, and each other's company. The painting that had transformed their circumstances had also confirmed something essential. Wealth could provide security and opportunity, but meaning came from how you chose to live regardless of your bank balance. The young woman in the portrait, Mademoiselle Beaumont, her identity finally restored after over a century of anonymity, gazed out at museum visitors with her mysterious, almost smile. And perhaps, if you look closely enough, you could see knowledge in those painted eyes, the understanding that true treasure isn't always what the world values most highly, and that sometimes the greatest discoveries are the ones that reveal not what we're worth, but who we truly are. If this story moved you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have more incredible true stories coming your way. And check out these two amazing stories on your screen right now about other people whose lives changed in the most unexpected ways.